Vox Novus, the new voice. Vox Novus, the new dimension. Vox Novus, thought and movement leaders who will share from their experience and offer tools to help us navigate our rapidly changing world. My name is Victor Fuhrman. Welcome to Vox Novus, the new voice. What might the Spirit of the Divine offer us as our world faces its greatest challenges? My guest this week on Vox Novus, Laura Aversano, shares messages and teachings received in prayer that offer a living experience of the divine, the ancestors, spiritual wisdom, and healing love. Laura Aversano is a medical and spiritual intuitive, an ancestral empath, and a spirit walker. Descended from an ancient lineage of Sicilian adepts and seers, she's been communicating with the spirit world since childhood. Her website is lauraaversano.com, and she joins me to share her path and latest book, Affirmations of the Light in Times of Darkness, Healing Messages from a Spirit Walker. Please join me in welcoming to Vox Novus, Laura Aversano. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you for having me, Victor. Nice to be here today.
And thank you so much for joining us. Laura, growing up in Brooklyn, I had many friends of Italian descent, and in particular, Sicilian descent. I have fond memories of my friend's nonna, his grandmother, and the wonderful smells that filled her kitchen. I also remember that she had jars of various herbs and unusual items that were not intended for food, but for healing, protection, and sometimes, for remedying situations. Your lineage is also Sicilian and is filled with tradition and spirit. Please share with our listeners your early path and what you learned about your heritage.
Sure. You're making me hungry thinking about my childhood now. My lineage and my childhood, I believe, was more psychic in nature. I grew up with an incredible mom who's still present with me today. And I talked a lot about spirits when I was a child. I talked a lot about past lives. I talked a lot about various things of a spiritual nature. And my mom was very open and welcoming to my conversations. I still remember, I think I was 6 years old, and we were on a boat in the water. And I started to share with her about how I died in the water, about various experiences that I had, about extrasensory perception, and she had never taught me any of that. I shared with her that I wanted to improve upon my psychic abilities. I mentioned names like Edgar Casey with her, and she just was present and she listened. I mentioned about my conversations with spirits. And as I got older, I came to see that my mother was very gifted herself, that she did offer people readings, and I came also to understand about how she grew up in Sicily. My mom used to hear words in her mind. She used to walk through the streets of Sicily, sharing litanies with people, and they would follow her. She also had what we call a near-death experience. She would have visions of the Holy Mother standing by her bed many times, and she thought she would dream. And at one point, her near-death experience, she actually died, or so they thought. They buried her in the traditional burial clothes, where people came to visit her in the living room, which is where they would lay the body. And she literally came out of a death trance a few days later and scared everybody.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
What else do you remember about those years?
I was fascinated by things that were beyond the veil. I was fascinated with reincarnation. It didn't faze me where my thoughts came from. I knew that when I mentioned those thoughts to some close friends and my mom, I know my friends had no clue at 6 and 7 years old where I was coming from. But again, thank God my mom held me with great respect and she listened to me. I was curious about good spirits and what back then as a child we were referred to as bad spirits. I was curious about why I could see and talk to certain beings and most people in my family couldn't. And with that said, there are many people. I have siblings who are very talented with psychic gifts. And I, I wanted to experience the other world to the degree that I could. I was fascinated with it.
Now, you were very blessed to have a mother and a family that would share with you and would be accepting of your gifts. Many children growing up who manifest these types of gifts often are told by their parents and family not to talk about it and not to share it with their friends. Did you have any issues outside of your family with your gifts?
Well, I think I chose, again, my father, I never shared those gifts with until I became an adult. And I guess he realized it when my book started to come out. For some reason, my focus was on sharing it with my mom. And again, when I shared it with friends when I was younger, I used to sit there, I still remember 7, 8 years old, asking my friends, let's play games. Can you tell me what I'm thinking? Can you see inside my mind's eye? And let me try to psychically see what you're thinking. And yes, they would look at me very strangely, and they had no clue as to what I was talking about. I was pretty astute for a young child. So I realized the moment that their response came back to me as they were uncomfortable, that I knew pretty much just to keep my conversations between my mother and myself.
Yeah.
And myself in the spirit world.
Absolutely. I remember also when I was very young, I was very close with my paternal grandfather, and he was well into his 80s when I was a child. And when I was 7, I was doing something in my room, reading a book or something, and looked up, and my grandfather was standing there. I said, "Grandpa, where did you come from?" Didn't say a word, just smiled at me. And then all of a sudden, he sort of vanished. He disappeared. And I went into the living room, and I told my mother and father, "Grandpa was here." And they say, "You're imagining things again." And 2 minutes later, the phone rang with word that he had passed. So that was my first conscious recognition of what we're talking about today when I was 7 years old. And of course, from being told I had an overactive imagination to saying what's going on here was a manifestation in my family, but I was told not to tell anybody else. So it's really interesting.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. I do remember you reminding me, if I may, of my first experience that I think I regarded as frightening. I was visiting Maine with my aunt, who was also my godmother at the time. And I remember her saying that we had to go visit her grandmother who was dying in the hospital. And I had the strong sense that I did not want to go with her. I did not want to visit the hospital. I did not want to see somebody dying. I was so frightened by that. And she kind of just dragged me along. We went to the hospital, and I remember screaming inside one of the hallways saying, "I don't want to see you inside that room. I don't want to see somebody dying." For some reason, I kept feeling her grandmother, whom I'd never met, surrounding me. And I went in, I said hello to her. I still remember my emotions to that day working through my body. And when we went back to her home that night, I was sleeping up in a loft, and the sheet at the end of my bed started to raise about 4 feet in the air. And this was after midnight. And her grandmother's head appeared at the top of the sheet. I began screaming. I ran down the ladder in the loft. By the time I got to the ground floor, the doorbell started to ring. Everybody in the house woke up between my screaming and the doorbell. They answered the doorbell, and it was the police coming from the hospital to let everyone know that she had passed.
Oh. So you have the same experience.
Yeah, that was my first, what I would equate to negative experience.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Would you describe your path as a blessing, a burden, or a blend of both, and why?
I think both. I know both. Blessing because I am fortunate enough to be able to hold space for the many people that I've come across in my work in over 26 years. I have worked with their children and now their grandchildren. That brings me joy. I have been blessed to work with people in comas via telepathy. I have been blessed to work with babies in utero, sharing with the mothers how these children will be like as they age, what their sensitivities or food allergies might be, how their personalities might be, only to have the mothers email me a few years later saying, "Remember when you said this?" Wow, I've been grateful enough to help people in the dying process, grateful to be able to talk with people who have passed on, grateful to be able to see medical ailments when doctors were not able to, or help people find ways to balance them and sometimes even get them much better. I've there are numerous experiences I've had, including through prayer, that make me feel blessed for being born with these abilities. And there are many ways that I have felt also burdened by them. With every book I have written, my body's actually gotten very ill. Being a collective empath, all those energies went through my body and sometimes have created really strong illnesses for me to work with. There are times I have struggled myself, both in my life and in my work, with both good and evil. It's really interesting. I share this story with students in some of my classes. When I was writing one of my books, The Light of God, which is now republished by Inner Traditions, I remember working with the chapters on evil. And at that time, I was having experiences both with angelic beings and both with beings that were basically in darkness. And there was this one being who was creating a lot of havoc in my home, let's just say. And I still remember when I was finished with the book, that being actually came up to me, frightened me a little, was surprised, but he came up to me peacefully and bowed and said, "Thank you." Because there was something that happened in the writing of that book that took his darkness as well as mine in the interaction to a higher frequency. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. And sometimes there are things that frighten me. There was one time that I came home from a class and I remember working with some darkness that was around a student, and I walked into my door and my cat was thrown across the room by something that people can't see.
Oh.
And when experiences happen like that, I have learned, and I subsequently teach, you do not engage. You need to sometimes let things pass through you or pass around you. And you go from there.
Absolutely. You had mentioned telepathically communicating with those in coma. What type of situation do you get from them? What do they sense about what's around them?
It's been such a long time. I remember there are two stories that still touch my heart. There was one person that was unconscious, I'm remembering, and one person that was in a coma. The one in a coma, I think the client was in Australia, and it was a family member. This must have been about 15 years ago. And she said, "Can you tell me what's happening with them, what they're sensing, what they're feeling?" And honestly, I really thought I was going to only get the spirits around them being able to ascertain the condition of the patient as well as what was happening. But I actually heard the person speak, and they were telling me about their lives, which I didn't know about it, so I would relay that message to my client. They were telling me about what was happening, as though they had crossed over, at least that specific client, as though they had crossed over. So they were not aware of what happened to them, which I found fascinating. And I didn't want to influence their ability to communicate with me. I wanted to just stay present with their kind of euphoric feeling and share with that person, because since they weren't aware, I never had another session with that client. I don't know actually what happened to that patient that was in the coma, if they actually did cross over. But again, it reminded me of somebody who had just died, who was very euphoric and was just sharing bits and pieces about their life. There was another person that I'm remembering that's coming to mind at the moment. He was a young male, about 32 years old. It was very sad. He had just had a baby. So somebody asked him to go to their house and please to talk with them, to try to speak with them. And the mother was young. I think she might have been 29 or 30. The infant was literally less than 6 months old. I remember walking into the room, and the mother-in-law was there, as well as the nurse's aide, who did not know why I was doing there, even though the wife tried to explain to me. And they thought I was off my rocker. And I sat down, and he was unconscious, this young man, and I held his hand. And I remember, I have tears in my eyes thinking about this. I remember hearing his voice in my head, and I began to share with the wife what was happening, what he was saying. I said, "Oh, you had a conversation last night about this, about this, about this," when he was awake, or you had a conversation. I think he had slipped into some sort of transient coma overnight. And I said, "Oh, and a few days ago, he did mention this to you. And this is what," I know he was talking about the pain he was in. And so I was relaying messages, and I was turning around and watching the wife's mouth drop open, and the mother-in-law was still looking at me. And I said, "And there are all these people in this room, and I'm seeing somebody who said he knew your son." And the mother-in-law, and the wife was looking at me, and they had no recollection. I was just sharing everything that I was hearing and seeing. And when I left, something else came through him. I turned my head, I was out the room, and he woke up for a split second, waved at me, which sent chills through my spine and still does so to this day. He waved at me, went back into being unconscious. And a week later, they'd asked how long he had, and I said about 2 days. A week later, week and a half, I went to his funeral, and the wife pulled me aside. She said, "Before he died, he came to one more time. And he said, 'Did you hear everything I told Laura to tell you?'"
Mm. Mm. You know, I've done hospice work in my capacity as an interfaith minister, and I've personally helped people cross over, including my mother in January of 2020. But which is a blessing, by the way. I take it as a blessing. Yeah. But one of the things that happens, especially with people who are conscious and getting near transition, is sometimes they'll say they see their relatives in the room coming to welcome them. Have you had that experience also?
With my father, actually, recently, with my father and with my grandmother. My father just passed in February, and he suffered from a number of things, but had his first stroke actually a year ago, this past June. It was a difficult road for everyone involved. And my father, I'm laughing because he's very Italian. He's from Naples and Ponza. And a few weeks before he died, he would actually curse at his family members coming in the room, telling them to leave. He was cursing. He was using words I will not repeat on the air, but he would curse and say, "Get out of here. I don't want to go."
That's funny.
So we thought he was asking us to leave, but I knew he wasn't. And when he would kind of come to, he would say his mother was there, his brother was there, and he was telling them, "Go away. I'm not going with you." Mm. So he did not want to go. He was fighting it.
But you've experienced that with other people, right?
Yes, I have. Yep.
And is it a sense of comfort for most people to see their beloved, the departed ones coming to welcome them?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. It is. Mm. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. And when they're talking to me about it, and you have witnessed this as well, I'm sure, they're already in an altered space. Mm. And so it's just lovely because they feel so safe.
Absolutely.
So safe. No matter how much I tried to convince my dad, when they come for you, you're just going to walk through another door. You may not be able to talk with me the way that you normally do, but your eyes are not going to be shut, Dad. So he'd yell at me, "Get out of the room too."
My mom, my mom was in a coma in January of 2020. She'd been in hospice for several months, and my sister called me and said the hospice nurse said this is the time, and I joined her at the hospital. And my dad had died when I was 15, and he was the love of her life. And after he passed, when I was 15, there was a song at the time by Bobby Goldsboro called "Honey," and the lyrics said, "And honey, I miss you, and I'm being good, and I long to be with you, if only I could." So when I was with my mother's side, at my mother's side, and recognized that her time was very close, I took her hand, I said, Mom, if you look right in front of you, you can see Daddy. He's waiting for you. And he's singing, and honey, I miss you, and I'm being good, and I long to be with you if only I could. Go to him, Mom. He's waiting for you. And with a few more minutes, her breath stopped, and she joined him and died very peacefully. So I feel very blessed to have been able to help her through that transition. And I know how much meaning that has for you.
Yeah. Oh, that was beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And yes, we are very lucky to have been able to be part of that process. I truly mean that.
Absolutely. My guest is Laura Aversano. She's the author of so many books, including The Light of God, Affirmations of Light in Times of Darkness, Healing Messages from a Spirit Walker and Spirit Walker. Laura, please tell our listeners where they can get your books and find out more about you and your amazing work.
Oh, absolutely. You can look at my website at www.lauraaversano.com, and my email is there as well. I'm on Facebook. And my books are sold anywhere books are sold. Amazon.com. The publisher of my latest books are Inner Tradition. So just anywhere books are sold online.
And we'll be back with more of Laura after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
The best of the holistic, spiritual, and conscious world. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM. OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Hello, I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, host of OMTimes Magazine's flagship radio show, What is Going On? My passion is sifting through information, research, and innovations from new thought teachers, speakers, and researchers pushing back the boundaries of what we know about life, energy, metaphysics, and the universe. I love shifting perceptions about who we are, why we're here, and how quickly impossible becomes normal when we open our minds, expand our awareness, and accept that the only limits that exist are those we place upon ourselves. So if you're the kind of forward-thinking, eager investigator of what lies beyond the current reality that most perceive, why not make a date to come play with me in the field of possibilities at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday, and together we can discover what's really going on.
Mama, what does the chicken say?
Chicken. Oh, okay.
When the wolf?
Oh, a wolf. Ooh!
What about the tiny dog? Cat? Owl?
Ooh, ooh, ooh.
Dolphin? What does the turkey say? Whale?
Yeah, whale sound.
Do the giraffe?
Giraffe, really? Okay. Giraffe.
You're not going to get it all right. Just make sure you nail the big stuff, like making sure your kids are buckled correctly in the right seat for their age and size. Get it right.
Visit NHTSA.gov/
the right seat.
Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
Hi, this is Bill Maher. I can find humor in almost anything, but one thing I never laugh about is cruelty to animals. If you don't get the joke either, write People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, 501 Front Street, Norfolk, Virginia, 23510.
Back on Vox Novus, my guest this week is Laura Aversano. Laura, what's happening on the other planes at this time, and what messages are being shared from there?
I just taught a class last week, and we talked about the same subject. For the last few years, it has been utter chaos in the spirit world. For me, it's just light battling darkness. It is about spirits have been coming around people trying to help them. The mass crossings over with all the people dying from COVID, the natural disasters. It's almost like spirits are just coming here saying, please be patient, please surrender, please stop fighting, stop hating each other. The same messages that people hear over and over again. And they're also asking us for acceptance. Acceptance for a lot of the changes that are happening in our world.
And how are they asking for that acceptance? Are they asking for us to surrender?
Yes, but not, they're asking us to surrender ego. And I don't normally use that word because ego can be healthy because we do live, it's an earth element, and we do live in this world. But they're asking us to surrender the ego that goes out of balance. They're asking us definitely to be kinder towards one another. And they're asking us to forgive.
Forgiveness, that's really important, isn't it?
Yeah. And that takes work. You know, it was beautiful for me to see when COVID happened, people started to care about one another more. At least in my community, people that couldn't afford food, people were making food deliveries. They were helping with animals. And so there was a level of kindness and caring that started to take place. And I thought, wow, this might be what we need. And then it reversed itself again. We went back into an energy of entitlement.
The act of kindness can be something as simple as smiling at someone and saying, have a wonderful day.
Yes.
Or giving someone a hand when they can't reach something on a shelf in a grocery or something of that. Anything, any simple act that you would welcome for yourself, like the golden rule, doing to others as you'd have them doing to you.
Absolutely. I agree. I'm still astounded and astonished when I hold the door open for somebody and they're looking at their iPhones and there's not a thank you coming out of their mouth.
Yeah. We both grew up in families where common courtesy, extending that to others was taught and reinforced.
Absolutely. I'm not sure. I can't say I'm not sure what's happening. Again, there's something about entitlement. There's something about our relationship to power and powerlessness. And there's something about our survival that's permeating our world society.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of your most popular classes deal with ancestral healing. Please share with our listeners about ancestral healing and how it helps us in this lifetime.
Absolutely. And yes, they are my favorite classes, some of my favorite classes. I'm known as, one of the things I'm known as is a medical intuitive. And as part of my work, looking at people's health, whether it's their emotional health, psychological health, or spiritual health, is I look at their epigenetics. And I'm not a scientist, but epigenetics is the study of what is passed down in our DNA, the study of how thoughts can be passed down, environmental toxins can be passed down, emotions can be passed down, trauma can be passed down, as is our relationship to that trauma. And so when I look at ancestral healing and when I work with ancestors and or spirits, I'm looking at the transgenerational trauma that surrounds a client and their family, how it's passed down, and the relationships that have formed sometimes over centuries to that trauma. And so the way that a person holds a thought in their body, an emotion in their body, a neurotoxin in their body, their relationship with a food that they like, much of that can be influenced by an ancestor that's beyond the veil. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And then how do you go about healing that?
Well, first of all, I'd like to use the word balance. I'm very careful about using the word quote unquote healing when it comes to my work with clients. And so first of all, I listen and I hold space, whether in a class or with a client. And if they're talking about a challenge or when they're speaking about a challenge that happens in their life, sometimes the ancestor will literally appear behind them, or I'll hear a description of the ancestor, or I'll hear a description of the trauma. For instance, I remember I was working with a woman eons ago, and she was anemic. I'm trying to remember the story. That's why I'm kind of reticent. She was anemic, and I took a moment and I prayed and I asked the spirits to give me guidance. And I said, wait a minute. I said, your family comes from the South. I said, do they happen to be sharecroppers? And she said, yes. And I said, from what I'm seeing and their diet way back when consisted of so on and so forth. And there was some level of malnutrition from not getting the proper nutrition that they needed for all the work that they did. And so somewhere in her DNA was encoded a level of starvation for certain nutrients. And so in this lifetime, no matter what her body ate, even if it consisted of animal flesh, she wasn't able to absorb the iron that she needed because of that ancestral trauma. And so in working with her, first I needed to work with the trauma on a homeopathic level and on a psychic level, and then suggest to her remedies here in this world to help her body make peace with that trauma and then be able to absorb the iron from what she was taking in.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. You talked about creating sacred space and listening. How important is that with each other today?
I think it is what our survival depends upon. It is what humanity depends upon. I think that we are set up not to hold space for each other for whatever reasons. Everyone's too busy. Most people have 2 jobs or work 70 hours a week. And it's both parents working, and it's the thought about more is better has become pivotal in our world's culture. And so with that thought of more is better, there is no time for each other. There is no time for that tribal energy of community. And because we are lacking in that community energy and communal energy, I truly think we're suffering.
And you had mentioned the negative aspect of ego. And unfortunately, some people think that listening means every time someone shares something, they have to opine and share their opinion or their remedy to that situation.
I was thinking of that this morning. I'm laughing. I was really thinking of that this morning. That's true. It's very hard for people just to listen and not offer a response or retort.
Absolutely, especially when people are grieving. That's the most difficult time.
Yes, I agree.
You've written several books, with the latest being an iteration of something that you first channeled in 2001. You had mentioned this before, The Light of God. You refer to this work as dictation and your sharing as locution. Please explain.
Absolutely. I might have a different definition of channeling than other people do. For me, it's when something takes over your entire body, as far as when you're, quote unquote, working with a book or a written piece. For me, I sat there in much prayer, especially in my 30s while working with clients. I would sit in much prayer, go into ecstatic states of union, and I would have visitations, I'll just say, from heavenly beings sharing with me. And I would type words or write down words, and thus became the light of God. So I feel like it was a co-creation between myself and the heavens. And as far as the word locutions, I actually believe the priest who wrote the foreword to that used those words.
Okay. Your earlier books include The Divine Nature of Plants, Wisdom of the Earth Keepers, and Plant Spirit Journey, Discovering the Healing Energies of the Natural World. How did these plants share their gifts and wisdom with you?
Sure. I was just speaking about that last week, actually. So just so everybody is aware, I had no formal training in herbalism. And when I began my practice at 26, I would have various spirits appear to me and give me remedies for clients' illnesses out of the blue, whether it was nutrition, whether it was an herb, whether it was you need to get to a doctor to get this test. And I remember it would just keep coming and coming and coming. And one day in prayer, they said, write a book. I was even given the title, Divine Nature of Plants. And I said, okay, I'm not an herbalist. How will I do this? And I had a friend at that time who I shared this idea with and was very encouraging, showed me how to actually make tinctures. But she knew that I had to sit with the plants and come up with remedies myself. So I remember purchasing all the plants in the Divine Nature of Plants. I brought them here to my home in New York City, and I planted them. They were a few inches tall. Every day I went out there for 2 weeks straight, and I sang to them, and I prayed to them, and I spoke to them. And within a few weeks, they grew to over a foot tall. And they afforded beautiful pictures for that book. I was able to take a leaf from each one of them, and I sat in meditation and journeyed with the plants as well as their spirits that availed themselves to me. And they told me of all the spiritual, emotional, and physical ailments that they work with and or balanced. And in comparison, comparing what I wrote to other herbal books, pretty spot on.
Wonderful. What is your relationship with the plants now? Do you actually talk to them every day, or?
I don't grow them in my backyard anymore, just because it was inviting many animals to kind of feast and forage on them. But I still have a sacred relationship when I do visit places where nature is abound. I still talk with the trees.
Yeah.
I still relate to any herbal preparation that I take. When I make an herbal tea, I say a prayer over it. I still work energetically with my nutrition. So I would say yes. I still talk to what nature provides us with.
Absolutely. It's interesting. When I was younger, someone referred to me as a tree hugger in the form of an insult, and I took it as a badge of honor. So I find so much energy and strength and wisdom from trees.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I love them. I love them. I remember I went to Central Park once, and I sat under this tree and I started to cough, and I couldn't stop coughing. And I'm looking around going, what's making me cough? And I just grabbed onto the tree, and my lungs started to hurt. And I shifted my gaze downwards, and I saw the multitude of cigarettes around the tree. And I just thought, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry for this.
Absolutely. The book that first made me aware of your work was the novel Spirit Walker, The Beginning. Tell us about Mariella.
Mariella is actually my mom's name.
Ah.
And so I used her as the main character as far as her name. So Mariella and Spirit Walker is loosely based on my abilities, not necessarily the personal story in it. It is based on my abilities being a spirit walker, on day-to-day waking up, and sometimes having a multitude of spirits walk through my room, especially before a natural disaster, having various spirits talk to me about family members, just having to balance a normal life with animals, a household, health, friends, family. And it's just kind of walking between both worlds, and the fine line of sometimes it could be too much in one world and too much in the other. And so it's about Mariella's trials and tribulations, as well as trying to navigate personal relationships. So again, loosely based, but a good read.
And the name Spirit Walker.
That name was given to me in prayer.
How did that come about?
I was just thinking about the book, and one day a spirit said, "You are a spirit walker." That was it. I was actually told about the book 20 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sometimes we get those messages and we're not ready to put those into practice, right?
Well, yes, and I also had other books that I knew I had to write. So I'm just like, okay, you guys have to wait. And I tell people this all the time, and I was taught this by my wonderful mentors. You don't do everything that you're asked to do, because remember, there are spirits, there are many different dimensions on the other side, and spirits still have attachment. And so just because somebody tells you to do something, you don't do it. If it keeps coming to you over and over again, that your life changes and it's right in front of you, and if you don't do it, then chaos starts to happen. Then you know you're meant to. So when I was younger, I was so excited hearing messages in my 20s and before that. Now, as somebody in her 50s, in her early 50s, I have a different relationship and different boundaries with those on the other side. And it's taken me a while to get there.
Absolutely. My guest is Laura Aversano. We'll be back with more of Laura after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free. AscendingHearts.com.
My simple solution to the problem was remove people from the scene and help them feel safer.
In response to attacks against Asian Americans, Maddie Park raised over $250,000 to donate cab rides to the Asian community.
There is so much more work to be done. We really need to come together and tackle this issue as a community.
Support the Asian community. Learn how at lovehasnolabels.com. Brought to you by Love Has No Labels and the Ad Council.
So I'm a cat, and I just moved in with this new human, and she's got this little toy she's always playing with, all day long. Tap, 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 bloop, bloop. She can't put it down. There it is. Oh, and get this. She even talks to it. Last week, she asked it for Chinese, and guess what? Egg rolls showed up. Like magic. Humans have cool toys.
A person is the best thing to happen to a shelter pet. Be that person. Adopt. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the ShelterPetProject.org.
Hey, Dad, your prescription will be ready in just a minute. Hey, Dad, your laundry will be ready in just a minute. Dad, your lunch will be ready in just a minute.
Hey, honey, why don't you take a minute? When you help care for a loved one, you give them as much time as you can. But it's just as important to take time for yourself. AARP can help. Find free care guides to support you and your loved one at aarp.org/caregiving. That's aarp.org/caregiving. Brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
Back on Vox Novus, my guest this week, Laura Aversano. In June of 2021, you published Affirmations of the Light in Times of Darkness, Healing Messages from a Spirit Walker. It contains a series of beautiful parables for difficult times. With the turmoil of the last couple of years, the egregious acts of violence, and the pall that seems to cover our world, we most certainly were plunged into times of darkness. But darkness can also be a great teacher, can't it?
Yes, it can. Yes, it can. It's interesting, if I may share how that book birthed itself.
Please.
On Facebook, I had become friends with a publisher and writer himself. And there was one point when he was reading my Facebook post and he said, "These are amazing. They really take me on a journey. Can we put them into a book?" And I said, "Okay, that would be great." And therein lies the conception and inception of the Affirmations book. And part of what I hope, or my prayer for that book, part of what it does is indeed take people on the spiritual journey inwards. It helps to balance the ego, balance light and darkness, quiet the emotion, quiet the thoughts, and hopefully bring people to a state of grace. So when it comes to our relationship with fear, my thought about balancing it would be for us to learn to practice sitting in a state of grace.
Can you describe that for our listeners? How do they get into a state of grace?
I don't know if my answer will give my experience due justice. For myself, it truly became a practice of contemplative prayer, of faith, which constantly gets challenged, of my relationship with myself, of developing a relationship with the divine in any tradition, of surrendering. Yeah, I think that's it.
I had a wonderful spiritual teacher when I attended the new seminary back in the 1990s. And he used to share that everything is unfolding in divine order. We may not see it. We may not understand it. We may actually be challenged by what's happening. But ultimately, if we take a step back and look at our past and our existence with spiritual eyes, we will recognize that there was a plan in place. Do you agree with that?
At the higher levels, I do. Meaning, if I'm looking at what's the intended outcome of all this chaos, it is to balance good and evil. And however that is happening, the higher realms will indeed do that. As far as the lower realms, I do believe that I do believe that humans think that they have free will. I'm going to say it like that. And I do believe at the lower realms, the ethereal realms of existence, we do. But I also believe that there's a higher will, a higher providence, a divine providence that makes sure that all chaos comes to rest in the light of God.
Absolutely. That same teacher would share that after creation, God would share that from that point forward, everything would be done in partnership with humanity. Have we forgotten that partnership, and how may we restore it?
I believe we have. I believe sometimes we want to remember it when we're in need, when we're frightened, when we experience darkness and we experience powerlessness and we don't know how to relate to it. So how can we restore it? I think, again, faith and trust in each other is really important. I think truly creating a relationship with powerlessness is key. Accepting that evil or darkness exists in whatever terminology or vernacular we want to use.
And also recognizing that within ourselves, the essence of that connection with the divine exists, and that with that, we can understand our self-worth and self-love.
Yes, absolutely. I think we're in a culture where we want things to be easier for us, and I understand that. But life isn't always easy. Life is about struggle. It is about suffering. It's also about joy. Perhaps there's more struggle and more suffering than there is joy. And for many of us, we lack a comprehension to understand how life can be like that. We don't understand how, in many traditions, how a god can let a genocide happen or a nuclear disaster or a world disaster happen. And I don't look at it like that. I think there's a lot that contributes to world events in many realms and in many planes. But again, we have to look at how are we contributing to this? And what does it mean for us to become still, to sit in the emptiness, and to be observers of not just our own reality, but a greater purpose?
Absolutely. And again, it comes down to creating that sacred space and actually listening, really listening to what the message is.
Yes. And that takes patience and courage, great amount of patience and courage. And in our world, most of us don't have that kind of time. It's unfortunate.
Absolutely. What would you have us take away from Affirmations of the Light in Times of Darkness?
Read it as though you were going on a journey. Let those words influence you, sit with you. Let them ignite a response from you. Sit with your responses. I remember a reader wrote to me and said, I opened the book and I can only read 1 or 2 pages at a time. I started to process enormously after it. It's pretty heavy, Laura. I hope it touches readers in some way.
And what messages would you like readers to take from The Light of God, Divine Locutions on Evil, Karma, Reincarnation, and Healing?
That regardless of what you think, we all have a relationship with the divine. We all have light. We all have darkness. We all have good. We all have evil. And it is our inner work and our jobs, basically, to learn how to balance it within ourselves and as we project it out into the world.
And that projection in the world must also include acts of kindness, understanding, and compassion.
Amen.
Absolutely. Laura, tell us about your classes, your offerings, and what you have upcoming.
Sure. Well, I just started going back to in-person classes. I have not gotten on the Zoom track yet, as many did during the pandemic. I'm not a fan of staring at the computer screen for a long period of time with my eyesight. But last week, I taught a plant spirit medicine class, and in October, up in Westchester, New York, at a place called Universal Healing Arts, I will be teaching another ancestral healing class. And you can find that. It's not on my website yet, but it will be on my Facebook page. And hopefully, as people start to continue to feel safe and meeting in person, and as numbers improve and venues allow more people to come, I'll be able to do more ancestral healing classes and medical intuition classes.
And just give us an idea of what those classes are like, the medical intuition classes.
Every class I do seems to be intense. As one participant said last week, he looks up, he goes, is it getting hazy in the room because my eyesight? And I said, well, that's the spirit world coming down to meet us. And so every class I do, I open up to spirit and the spirits in various dimensions. And we walk in both worlds. We journey into our thoughts, into our emotions, and into our bodies with every class I teach, no matter the topic.
And the classes that you teach about getting in touch with the natural world with plants and trees, what can listeners expect to it if they attend one of those classes?
We had fun the last class. I asked everyone to bring either a plant or a leaf or even a tincture. And I asked them to start to create and develop a relationship with that plant and see how it impacted or influenced their health issue that they were struggling with, or an emotional trauma, or anything else. Since it's so new, I wish I can use examples. But with one student, we went back to a pre-birth trauma. And we used a plant that she brought to help unwind that in her body. And her body felt so much better.
Absolutely. That's wonderful. Thanks for sharing that.
You're welcome.
What's next for Laura Aversano?
Oh dear. I don't know. I don't even know. I think, again, I'm very excited to get back to teaching in person. So I'm hoping that there are more classes that come forth and more venues that open themselves up to me and vice versa. And I've written a script, actually, for Spirit Walker. So, yeah, I've been quiet about that. I'm actually hoping to find an agent for it. I haven't had an agent in years. I've pretty much been solo. show, I'm hoping to find an agent because I think it would actually make a great scripted show.
You see it as a show or a movie?
Well, either or. But it would help people to understand the impact that epigenetics has on their health, that ancestors, as well as their own thoughts, as well as the environment on their health, and how to work with balancing it.
Wonderful. I remember it was a joke many, many years ago. I don't remember who told the joke, but the idea was my mother was frightened by a dog, so I can't be around dogs, something to that effect. That's what the epigenetics really is about, right?
Yes, exactly.
That's amazing. My guest, Laura Aversano. Laura, one more time, please tell our listeners where they can get your books and find out more about you and your amazing work.
Thank you. So my books, again, are anywhere books are sold, at the publishers Inner Tradition. So at Amazon, you can go into a bookstore and order the books if they're not on the shelves. And you can find out more about me on my website at www.lauraaversano.com. And I also have a personal page on Facebook and a professional page on Facebook. And so I post there.
Laura, thank you so much for joining us and gracing us with the life of a spirit walker.
Oh, thank you, Victor. It's been wonderful.
And thank you for joining us on Vox Novus. I'm Victor, the Voice Fuhrman. Have a wonderful week.